Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's virtual event with Brookline Booksmith, featuring Ben Philippe and Cyrus McQueen for their books, Sure I'll Be Your Black Friend and Tweeting Truth to Power. My name is Adam, and I'm a bookseller at Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Massachusetts. If you're familiar with our store, welcome back. If this is the first time you're hearing about us, welcome. We're very happy to have you all here join our community this evening, and we appreciate your support of Ben and Cyrus and Independent Bookstore for your purchases and attendance. So thank you so much for being here, everyone. The chat and the question box are open, so feel free to make use of those. Remember to set your chat to all panelists and attendees so you can talk to other attendees. And please drop your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window so they're not lost in the chat. It's going to be a great Q&A at the end of the event, so definitely have some questions ready. Please note that Brookline Booksmith has a strict policy against abusive behavior and language. At our discretion, any attendee can be removed from an event for partaking in such behavior. But we know that won't happen. You guys are great. It is such a pleasure to have Ben and Cyrus here with us tonight to talk about their new books. Cyrus's Tweeting Truth to Power, a book about his deeply personal and political journey he began in 2016 when he put aside the microphone to start addressing inequality and the hatred and division plaguing America. And Ben Philippe's Sure I'll Be Your Black Friend, a candid memoir and essays chronicling a lifetime of being the Black friend in predominantly white spaces. Cyrus is a comedian, cultural critic, and writer whose mirthful, insightful analysis of race and politics have resonated throughout the Twitterverse. His tweets pertaining to politics, pop culture, and race have routinely gone viral. A top 20 finalist on season 9 of NBC's Last Comic Standing, McQueen has also been featured in the A24 film I'll Be His Child and on AXS TV's Gotham Comedy Live. Ben is a New York-based writer and screenwriter. Born in Haiti and raised in Montreal, he has a BA from Columbia University and an MFA from the Missionary Center for Writers in Austin, Texas. He has written 2 young adult novels, Field Guide to the North American Teenager, winner of the 2020 William C. Morris Award, and Charming as a Verb. Sure I'll Be Your Black Friend is his first book of adult nonfiction. Ladies and gentlemen, without further delay, Ben Philippe and Cyrus McQueen.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Intro.
It is a very nice intro. Reading things that you wrote, you're like, oh, that's a very nice way of describing me, but actually I wrote that, I think.
I know, I have like imposter syndrome about so much in my life, and whenever I hear my bio, I'm like, oh, okay, I've done stuff. It's okay. I'm figuring it out.
Well, it's good to talk to you, man, like across a river and a lot of concrete. You're up in Harlem, I'm in Brooklyn. We're holding down a New York that is slowly rebuilding and reopening after this calamity that we call COVID.
Yeah, you're still in that phase where you're like, you carried a mask around and you have it up half the time and down half the time too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm still a little leery about the elevators and coming in and out of the buildings. That's, I gotta protect myself there.
Yeah, I've had two people yell at me on the streets of Harlem while I was walking my dog. One person was because my mask was down, and one person was because my mask was up. I'm just like, I'll keep it right here, so y'all can decide, and then I'll do whatever doesn't get me yelled at.
Yeah, I wonder when masks are going to finally fully go away, or if we're going to be holding on to these sort of like a security blanket for another year or two.
I think it's gonna be a security blanket thing. Like I was talking about this with my mom actually, and she's Haitian, and she's in Canada right now, so she's all settled. But because she grew up in Haiti, she always has like water boiling on the stove.
Yeah, that's one of the things I noticed about when I started reading your book. I thought that was so apt and so wonderful. Yeah, because if something goes down,
yeah, they're just always ready.
It's practical.
And one time, like after we'd been in Canada for like 19 years, I was visiting from the United States and there was a blackout for 40 minutes. She was feeling so smug. She was like, I told you, it went down. See, my warm water's on the stove right now. I'm like, congratulations, Mom.
So as a brother who grew up in Canada, I guess one of the things I wanted to get from you and your expertise, which you so well put out in this book, man. I really love your voice. It is just a charming, incredible read. What is the difference between white folks in America and white folks in Canada, in your humble estimation?
Ooh, very good question. Very, very good question. Honestly, I think, okay, first of all, the idea that like Canadians are super polite is very, very false. I think sort of like if you watch shows like Handmaid's Tale, there's always like that as soon as you make it to Canada, you're in the promised land. Everything is safe. Everything is good. No, it's basically northern Vermont, and there's even fewer people. So all those things we have in these states, like racism and all that stuff, we have it up there too. It just takes a slightly different, not even shape, just a different color, but it's all up there. I like to tell people, like, it's like northern Vermont. I think the difference in the two experiences for me is that I experienced white folks and just like life in Canada when I was a boy, like before the age of 18, and I experienced life as a Black man in America. So I think that's where, like, okay, I think it takes more effort to be outwardly racist towards a child. So when I was a child in Canada, like, I didn't really like engage in racial conversations. And if my family experienced racism, which they did, it was always sort of like, I don't fully understand the world, but we're immigrants, so we're gonna try not to make too many waves. And when I came to America, Barack Obama got elected while I was in college, and people just talk about race here. Like, it's a thing we do. We just try to like wrestle with it. And that did not really happen in Canada. In Canada, it was like, don't make any waves. Just like, you don't want to make them angry. And I think it was because we were immigrants. But in the US, I just like jumped right into it. So that was like definitely the starkest difference.
Well, I'm interested in, like, you did a lot of self-reflection and you wrote in ways that I aspire to. I know there's so many stories and things that I've sort of bottled up, and I'm like, well, my mother's still alive, I certainly can't write about that. Like, I really feel like I'm holding on to so much. Did you find that when you were writing, there's things that you examined for the first time that you probably hadn't really thought about or analyzed in a good probably 10, 20 years, and then you're like, wait a minute, I think that was actually racist. I'm processing this for my 8 or 9-year-old self, but yeah, that was definitely some trauma I went through.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure you noticed from your book too, like, when you're writing about your life, it's basically doing one-person therapy. Because like, if you're writing about, I'm gonna write about when I was 7. Well, you have a few key memories of when you were 7. And like, some of them, they stay with you because it was the first time you saw snow. It was your Christmas where you got like that N64. Like, there are things you remember, but there are other small things that you don't know why you remember them, but they're just locked into your DNA almost. And when you start to write them out, then you start to see like, oh, that was deeply traumatic. Oh, that is something that I'm now 32-year-old and I still carry that with me.
Right.
I think that is how writing can be exhausting. Like, writing fiction, I love writing fiction. I love those books I wrote before, but it was always sort of like, I'm telling a story. But when you're writing about your own life, it's really sort of like, I'm unpacking stuff. And I think one like self-doubt, self-mythology I had about myself before was that, like, I'm cool with my dad. He wasn't always there. He wasn't the greatest dad ever. But we're cool. It is what it is. And then as I was writing, I was like, oh, wow, I have deep daddy issues. Like, deep, they're baked in there. And you have to process all that stuff on your own. And it's the hard part of writing, but it's also kind of the fun part too.
Yeah, like, you wrote about like how your dad was a brilliant man, very reserved to like to a severe degree, or aloof, you could say, a lot of the times. Do you ever think about the fact that you are living his academic dream in some regards? Like, you feel like as a brilliant man, a brilliant Black man who was never fully regarded for his intellect, and how that might have ate at him in a way?
Cyrus, damn, this went there. We are in therapy right now.
Taking it there, I'm like Ilyama.
Yeah.
I'm gonna fix your life even if you don't want it.
Yeah, no, this is not like, do you like Jordan Peele? No, we're going there. Yeah, I think about that a lot of the time. And I think, like, I'm one of those kids, there are some people who don't recognize themselves in their parents. You're like, oh, I'm so different from my mom. I'm so different from my dad. In my case, I'm 50-50. Like, everything in me, there's not a single stuff about me that's like not those two people combined. I even like both of them had combined into one human being. So, no one was switched at the hospital in my case. And I think I noticed stuff about me that I definitely get from my dad. And it's always stuff like I don't expect. Like, the academic stuff, yeah, that was conditioned by him because I was raised in a house where, like, the world is racist. You're never going to change that. But we're going to move to Canada, and you're probably going to be like the only Black kid in your school. And the only thing that, like, you have to worry about is getting like amazing grades. That is like unlocking the world. And I think that sort of prioritizing of education was like a big thing in my family, because my dad was also born and raised in Haiti, so was my mom, and they were able to like travel the world and get scholarships and go elsewhere and get an education. So that was always like a huge thing in our house. But yeah, and I was like, oh, my dad is so this, my dad is so that. But then I became like an academic. I teach at a college, like it all sort of like, if you ever watched Friends, there's a joke in there that really stayed with me for like 20 years where Rachel's, Jennifer Aniston says like, oh, I was trying so hard not to become my mom, I became my dad. I was like, oh, that's it. That's what it is. Yeah, I'm pretty cool. I see a lot of my life now, and I know my dad would approve.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because we very similar in that regard, that we had old school dads, dads who didn't suffer fools, dads who inadvertently can minimize your struggle whilst highlighting how much they've had to go through, that completely just obliterates whatever your perceived struggle could be. My father grew up in Boston in the 1930s and 1940s. So he, there's racism with a lowercase r, as you and I could probably, just for working language establish. And there's old school, like, no, you're gonna have to maybe fight to the death to get from here to here, and so me going to a school, an all-white school, was like a privilege that I know he certainly, never could have experienced in his own life. And so my minutia, the day-to-day minutia, and my little struggles about like, oh, such and such doesn't like me, or I don't like the school. It's just like, listen up, boy. I had to find wood for the wood burning stove before my father got home, or I got beat. And it's just like, okay, you win. Your struggle certainly, it eclipses mine. But there's something about, my father I was his last child, so he had a family before me. He did a lot of living before me and my sister came along. And that was just informed, like, we're just talking about dad's just old. Dad's an old fogey. He's set in his ways, but it's just like, there's so much pain and struggle as you become a man and you go through your own pain and your own struggles, the stuff that you telegraph, the stuff that you also, keep under wraps. But you recognize like that man is a product of his experiences. And there's so much struggle that I can't even begin to understand, that he certainly never would have shared with me, because men didn't talk about those sort of things. They just sort of kept on keeping on. And, it's just one of those things that, as you get older, you find yourself reflecting about. It's like, no, this dude went through a lot. He went through a lot. So yeah, now I understand why he was dismissive when I was complaining about hating my school, Oh
yeah, absolutely. And you feel, I was belted by my dad when I was little. And sometimes when I tell this story to people, they're like, oh my God, that was child abuse. That was like so traumatic. What a monster. And, yes, and maybe to all of that. My dad, like, I know he has scars all over his back from like when his parents used to like whoop his ass in Haiti. So it's always that generational trauma. How much of it do we carry, and how much empathy we have to have when we look back? So even I don't know about you, but when I was writing about my dad, I was like, okay, I'm going to write about the unfun stuff about my dad, but I don't want to write the stereotype of another bad Black father, right? Because I feel like white people can write that on their own. Like, I don't want to be the person putting that out there.
To the narrative, totally.
Yeah, and you also don't want to be like, it's weird. Every time it was almost like doing math in my head. Every time I was writing something bad about my dad in particular, I would try to like find someplace else in the book to put something good, because I wanted the math to add up. Because especially Black men are dismissed so easily as like, having kids all over the place and then moving on, and then those kids are raised poorly and they become little thugs. So that is a narrative that is out there, and I just didn't want to like put anything more into that. But yeah, that is another scar we carry. So even though sometimes part of my book are like a middle finger to my dad, like there's also that other part that's like, well, no, hang on, let's have some empathy. Let's try to understand this person that made you.
Yeah, I think that we can't do anything but try to understand our parents as we move farther along and sort of start eclipsing the milestones that they eclipse. And like, at one point in time, 30 was like this impending monolith, like, oh my God, everybody over 30 is ancient, and all of a sudden you're 30. Like, wait a minute. I had to like recalibrate my understanding of what an adult is. But the struggle is certainly real. And I think as Black men in society, I look at, I'm certainly in a position now that I've got more opportunities than someone like my father did, who didn't go to college, who went to like apprentice school, but was just so freaking smart that you can't help but ask, if life had dealt him a better set of hands, if he had not been born in the city of Boston in 1934, could he have carved out a really incredible lane for himself? And so the fact that we are part of a continuum, I look at my father, I look at his father, and we could trace, my sister did a great family lineage look, and we could trace it back to an 1860 census document to, the guy who owned us. And certainly, the plight of living in society that is sort of hardwired to minimize you as a man of color. I recognize that this is going to be a struggle that one day my grandchildren are going to hopefully not face, but likely will. But we're part of a continuum. So as a man of color growing up in a time where overt racism was the way that society was run, to a situation that felt like we were living in some weird warp zone. I know, to give you a Zelda Mario Brothers reference, the last 4 years of the previous administration, it felt like, okay, I can fight the battles for my father that he necessarily couldn't have in his day. And so when you see overt racism sort of rearing its ugly head, it's like, okay, well, now I've got a toolkit and I've got that learning, I've got that rearing, and I'm living in a day and age where I really can respond to this in ways that you probably necessarily couldn't in the 1940s even.
Can I ask you something about that? Like, do you remember how did you react? Because I'm genuinely fascinated. How did you react when he won? Like when that administration started? Like, how was that moment for you?
I was crestfallen. I was legitimately sick to my stomach. I remember I read about it in the book. I didn't get out of bed for most of that Wednesday. It was like I went through every stage of grief. I went to anger, I went through denial. I ate my feelings with some leftover ice cream, and I finally ventured outside, and it really felt like the sky had fallen. Because remember, you're talking about a time when you come into your own in college and Obama's president. I was in my 20s and Obama was, now I'm old enough to remember when you can mutter, yeah, there could be a Black president, and your elders would roll their eyes because that was preposterous. There's no way there could be a Black president. To that becoming a reality. And somebody as magnificent, magnetic, and just erudite as Barack Obama to be the first Black president, he is a hero to me. And to see a cantankerous entity like Donald Trump set out to malign and undermine that transcendent figure, and so blatantly, brazenly so, that he got enough steam and momentum behind him to surf to the White House I was apoplectic. It was hard. It was hard to stomach. And I think it still is now. I think I will have, PTSD from the last 5 years for the rest of my life. I'll be telling my grandchildren about it.
Oh yeah. No, I asked because to me it was a fascinating moment. Keep in mind that I'm Canadian. I'm still a Canadian citizen. Like, really hard to get a green card, by the way. I remember when Barack Obama was first elected, I have like relatives who are Americans, and they weren't happy. And it's not like they were like, oh, ooh, Barack, but they were just like, this messes up the system. And like they're old school, born in Haiti immigrants who are now in America. Mm-hmm. And their take on it was like, why are we messing with those waters? Now they're going to be angry. Now there's going to be a backlash. Mm-hmm. And the same people, they were like the same ones to predict that Donald Trump was going to win. And they were like, yeah. And I was in the same emotional state as you were. I was like, Jesus.
Well, were you in the same state as me, like thinking there's no way that he can get elected? I remember my sister who lives in North Carolina, she, is privy to the talk radio down there. And she says, no, Si, I really think that Trump is going to win. And I said, I'm glad I didn't make a bet with her, but I was like about to say, I'll bet you $1,000. There's no way that man's going to get elected, because I thought he was so transparently narcissistic and just, sophomoric. There was no way that I thought that America would fall for that okie doke. To my surprise, in the worlds they did.
I mean, we're both in New York City, so we're both in a bubble. At the time I was working 2 jobs. One was in the performing arts at a nonprofit, and one was teaching at a women's college, teaching like film and in the English department. So in the liberal bubble. So I was like, there's no way. This is like a reality show that's going on for a little too long. And then by little, you saw all his opposition sort of fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
And I would get glimpses from the rest of America because I had a friend who like moved from California to New York City and he drove through the country. And he was like, no, dude, I've driven through states. I've counted it for like 50 minutes. And there was side on every lawn. Like, this is a thing. This is not the side thing you were thinking. This is at the center of the conversation.
Yeah, so that's what got me too. When I did a show in New Jersey, like 20 minutes out of New York. I did a show in Long Island, and like the bumper stickers and the lawn signs, I was like, I'm only 20 minutes out of Brooklyn. Like, this is real. This is really gonna happen.
Which is kind of a thing I have, like when you write about race, I think people are like, we've done the work. We've put the black square on Instagram. We all love Shonda Rhimes. Like, we've done the thing of not solving racism, but like of being on the right side of history, not just as individuals, but as a country.
Right.
Like, I won't tell them the majority, but there's so much hate against people of color, against anyone that's on the margins, that's still out there and active and waiting for like an opportunity to slip through.
Right.
And whenever I glimpse it, I get a little depressed, a little like hopeless about it, because I'm like, oof, okay, right now, the president of the United States is Joe Biden. In 4 years, we can't say that the president of the United States is not going to be Donald Trump. Like, I will speak for myself. I can't say that because it happened once, and
it can happen again. And also, we're going to test that metal. You know, how are they going to ingratiate themselves or try to support wholly righteous Black women? You know, that's still, or a woman for that matter. You know, we have a lot of hurdles. It's like, okay, are we really that advanced as a society, given what happened in January, given what continues to roil with voting rights? Are we really so confident that we won't again see another profound recoil? I think when we talk about Obama, we talk about Trump, we have to look at them within a similar vein, because one begets the other. What we've seen in this country, what we continue to see, is a profound recoil to Black advancement in our society. It happened with Trump's election. If you look back, it kind of happens every time we take a few steps forward. I come from a city of Boston where busing and integrating schools was a very caustic and very, tumultuous endeavor. As soon as there's progress, there's a recoil. And so I know for myself, I will never again underestimate America's potential to embarrass me and dishearten me in that way. Because this stuff it's in the ether and it's around us. And you and I, we went to all white schools, so we've got a polite, sort of genteel, for the most part, level of acceptance or regard to our person. But again, you talk about these bubbles. I think about what's going on in Oklahoma, what's going on in Nebraska, what's going on in Idaho. Each of them have 2 senators. So, places that are devoid of diversity ultimately will they'll surprise you.
And it's so ingrained in the way we think. Because I was thinking about this. I grew up in Canada and also in the United States, always seeing politicians as old white men. Just like, not even, this is not a slur, this is not an attack. Like, the demographic of politicians, of the people in charge, the people my parents paid tax to, they're old white men. So in a way, I've never been used to seeing people who look like me in power. And I realized that for a big contingent of this country, it's the literal reverse. They've never been used to seeing people who don't look like them in power and in charge of the direction of this country. So when they say like, oh, well, Barack Obama was not my president, I used to roll my eyes at that, sort of like, okay, yeah, that's just, you can say it, but he's in the White House. But no, it's like this fundamental divide in this country that, like, if you expect the infrastructure, you expect the world to look exactly like you in order to feel seen. And I think that because we're minorities, we got over that very quickly. We're like, no, I'm gonna turn on TV. I'm gonna turn on CBS at 8 p.m. on a Wednesday. I don't necessarily expect to see Black people because the world is not like built in my image. But for white people, I think it's the reverse. So that divide is still very much there. After Obama, after Trump, it's still at the center of this country.
One of the most, I want to call what I wrote profound, but one of the more profound moments that I had through my process of writing this book was I'm reflecting on growing up in an all-white school, and I'm reflecting on moments where I felt my insignificance was magnified because for whatever reason, whether it was a job I was going for or whether I was, one of the only Black males in my classroom, any of my exchanges with my white counterparts, it felt like there was this disconnect. And I ultimately came to describe it as when they couldn't see themselves, they couldn't see me. So as a person of color, inundated with, like you said, we both grew up on that 70s show or, Seinfeld or you name it, we can constantly project ourselves onto that screen because we have no other choice but to do that if we want to have any sort of semblance of imagination. So the inability of those in the majority to do that experiment, I find troubling. Like every Oscar telecast for my entire childhood, maybe Denzel Washington one time, but like I'm constantly seeing, this reinforced. But it came down to this moment of clarity. I actually got out the bed and typed into my phone. It was like, when they cannot see themselves, they cannot see you. And so that's ultimately what the test is going to be moving forward as a society, because a lot of people, I think, will treat Black Lives Matter or even Juneteenth and their celebration and acceptance of that as a sort of panacea that will all of a sudden absolve this country and this world of its dark undercurrent. And I'm afraid that many will lull themselves into a sense of complacency because I don't identify as being hateful or being anti-Black, but others do. So, because I'm not, that means it's okay. And I find a lot of people, they look for that connection. They want to look for themselves in the equation when it's like, well, no, there's a lot of people who look like you who don't necessarily have your sort of heart.
Oh, absolutely. And the whole Juneteenth thing is an interesting, not experiment, but we're seeing it happen live. Because
in real time, for sure.
It's kind of wild to me because it is a good thing that it's happening. There's no doubt about it. But I think what the world turns away from almost immediately is sort of like what led to this. Juneteenth is now being celebrated because of the summer of 2020. It's being celebrated because of this ugly divide at the center of this country. So you can't just look at it as like, well, we've added a day to the calendar and now Google is going to change its little font on the
you made it when Google changes the font.
You have to look at the entire thing. And I so understand why people don't want to look at it because it is just ugly. You used to own people like me. I was a person, I was something you owned. Yeah. And owning me, you got hella rich because I worked all day for you. I didn't act or think like a full human being. And you got to sort of like build a world in your image. That is a rough thing to ask people to look back on. I think whenever I have, throughout this book, sort of like I talk about having conversations with white friends. That
was the first thing that jumped out at me when, like, because I've had that conversation. Why do you hate white people? Am I the bad guy? Why does the white person have to be the bad guy? That conversation you had with, I think his name was Mark, and quote unquote in the book. Yeah. I've had that conversation. I feel like every Black person of a certain age has had that conversation.
And you're put in such a strange position because what do you do, right? Because you're like, I'm not mad at you. I'm not even mad. I'm just like telling you how the world is, how it's different from me than it is from you. Right. And they're like, no, it's so unfair. How am I privileged? Like, I have student loans. My girlfriend broke up with me. Right. My sneakers are shitty. Like, how am I privileged? And it's like, no, dude, you have to believe me. You are. You have a thing that others in the world don't have. And I think the only way I found to sort of like create that exhausting bridge to have those conversations is to also acknowledge how I'm privileged. I have, able-bodied privilege. I have a ton of male privilege. I have life privilege because, I don't have any college debt. So that is something I can give to a Marty who's looking at me at like, I graduated and I owed $40,000 to the government. I'm like, cool, I got a scholarship, I didn't. So and it's uncomfortable when I do it, look at my own life and I do it too, right? I was like, oh, yeah, I do have.
Black Americans, you talk about growing up in Haiti. even Black Americans, we have there's a hierarchy here and stuff. It's like, oh, you have running water. We can talk about the things of Flint notwithstanding, but like, oh no, you have running water. You had fresh produce. Like your struggle. There's levels to this. As a Black American, you have to admit, yeah.
And one thing I sort of like really dislike is when having stuff moves you closer to being white or to being considered white. The whole Oreo thing. Oh, what? You're not Black. You read books. Like, excuse you? Books are not a thing that belong to white people, right? When people sort of like say like, if we're going to talk about privilege, we're talking about those who have and those who don't have. Having is not a state of whiteness. So I think that's something I always bristle against. And I grew up sort of like laughing at it, smiling at it, like, oh yeah, I am an Oreo. Oh yeah, I do like music that is typically white. But I try not to racialize that, because once you internalize that everything good about you is actually white, you're sort of dead on arrival. You're like broken on the inside. You're Candace Owens. I'll say it, I don't care. There is that thing that happens, like that break that can happen inside yourself when you start to see whiteness in you, I think.
Well, I think it's a flawed matrix of classification when we as a people have come to ascribe whiteness to education. I think that's one of my biggest hangups with conversations I have with some of my own folks, is how we can get so comfortable in our insignificance that we'll lean into it. You know what I mean? So many African Americans, my brethren, people who I love and who, make me who I am, play proxy to white supremacy without realizing it. And it's one of the hardest things you have to admit as a person of color. It's like, what about your emotions and actions and just thought processes have internalized this theory of supremacy to your own detriment? So when we equate education with being white, that means we're comfortable being in a lower class station. And that's become reinforced over generations and generations and generations. You compound that with things like drug addiction, which my family knows all too well. And you find people in your life, in your community, who've gotten so comfortable in their insignificance that they fucking lean into it. And one thing that I've tried to do, I've made my hiccups, I've lived in New York a long time, is I've tried not to lean into it and certainly play proxy to it with my own sort of, stilted or low expectation having self at times, Sometimes we don't go for the good things. We don't do what's best for us. We don't honor our best angels because somehow, somewhere, this American malware has programmed us to self-destruct. And it's something that I've contended with for decades. It's something that I'll probably contending with for the rest of my days. Do I play proxy? Do I self-destruct, or do I rage? And I guess me writing this book was my moment of rage.
Oh yeah, same. I think like, I see why this battle is happening, because I think this was almost like, in many ways in my life, writing this book was the first time I stepped out of line of being that person who came to North America as an immigrant, who was told not to make waves, to just like get along with your classmates and get along with your teachers. All my classmates, all my teachers were white. Pull up your pants, because that they don't want to see your pants sag, and that reflects.
I love that little anecdote. Like you say, your mom said, "Don't think that we can't afford to buy you a belt." I just love that angle. I love that. Your book is so good. I enjoyed it so much. Don't speak Creole in Creole. He told me in Creole, don't speak Creole. I loved it.
That is just, and yeah, it is that internalized thing that like, okay, we're different. It's just like, we forget it. If we forget our difference, maybe they'll forget it too. They'll let us thrive a little bit. Right. And that's baked in. And I've sort of like, tried to address some of it in my life, but some of it I haven't. And I think it sounds like it's the same case for you, because we live in this world. And, when you sit at a table of white friends and you're saying like, yeah, white patriarchy is probably a bad thing, when, it's a bunch of white people, they're going to nod along to it to a certain degree, but we don't really wrestle with it. Right.
Oh. I think that's something I took from your book as well. And it's something that I've had this conversation myself. You think a lot about race. So it's like, well, yeah, I think about race. And somebody on Twitter has hit me with that numerous times. I think about race and I talk about race, so you don't have to. And that's where we are. I think about it because you aren't, perhaps.
No, there was a little bit.
Call the brother's burden.
Oh, there was some backlash to this book. And like the first thing people started like slinging at me was like, oh, you're such a race baiter. And I didn't know what that meant. But then I sort of realized like, oh, I'm making you think about race. That is all that is. I am making you think about this thing.
Gotcha. So maybe I am.
I guess so. If that's how low the bar is, it's just like, oh, look, I just pointed at racism. Oh, well, quit it, you race baiter. It's like, no, the reason you want that option is that you have that option. You can tune out race. Like when people say, it used to be like we're saying so many things all at once because these conversations are like, that's why I say in the book, like, I really needed to make Black friends at some point in my life in the United States. I didn't really have that before. But when you live your life trying to sort of fit in to those narratives, like it can become truly, truly, truly exhausting. And I think we should both, I don't know, be pretty proud of ourselves that like all of our anger we channeled into books, right? That's pretty awesome.
I could have walked into a Starbucks and went ballistic, but I said no.
No.
Go home, put pen to paper, and I'm going to exercise these demons the right way.
Oh. And sometimes you just don't want to. I've been like the person who makes things awkward at like a dinner party because you're just exhausted about the state of the world. You're tired of always having to be that person. You just wish people would get it. And you know, I've had this conversation with people I was dating who are like, well, I'm dating you, Ben. I can't be a racist. And I was just like, yeah, you're dating me. You really shouldn't be a racist. But this thing that's happening right now, it's a little racist. So we have to talk about it and wrestle it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you said about, you know, the 3 Black people invited to the wedding in Vermont all see each other and, oh yeah, we're gonna talk smack at the open bar about the fact that there's just the 3 of us here.
Oh, no, that actually happened to me. And it's like, I think because we just clocked each other at like the wedding. It was a wedding with like, I think 120 people. There were 3 Black people in it. I was like, that's cool. This person, these 2 families, they don't know a lot of people. That's totally fine. And I was like, is he gonna do it? Is he gonna sit us all at the same table? And then 2 of us got seated at the same table. And then the third one, we're just tracking. She got seated at a different table. And all 3 of us just looked at each other. I was like, okay, we're good. We're good.
That could be a film, a short film about the 3 Black people who didn't know each other who bonded at an all-white wedding. That's a comedy that writes itself.
Yeah, or horror movie, depending on, you know, who directs it.
Jordan Peele's next project, who knows? But no, I find it interesting. We're living through very, very interesting times. I think all this considered, the fact that we, you know, last year and what I write about towards the end of the book with the pandemic running concurrent with, I call America's pre-existing pandemic and racism, and all this stuff coming to a head at the same time, we're watching a Black man being murdered on national television over and over and over and over again. It's sort of one of the things I felt hopeful about, because we always got to end these things on hope. One of the things I kind of allowed myself to get carried away in terms of my sense of hope is that the fact that the world shut down, we basically allowed everybody to see something that we've always been seeing and contending with for the rest of our lives, and they had nothing to compete with. Nothing was jogging for their attention. They had no sort of obligations. People were stuck at home, and they basically got to watch this vile practice of police predation and reach its tragic fruition. And they had no channel to turn to. They had no sports to take away their attention. And I do believe that moment of hope came from, was like, okay, this was able to touch people who under normal circumstances would have been callous or wouldn't have been able to feel it. And so I do believe, and we'll see, I guess, tomorrow, because tomorrow they're actually finally sentencing Derek Chauvin in the George Floyd trial. Let's see. I pray that that judge will do the right thing, but I also, there's electricity that's just ready to ignite at any moment, if, you know, especially this brother, if like they do not do the right thing.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to end on a hopeful note for me too, looking back at 2020. I think ultimately the hopeful note was that like we could all, most of us, could see that this was a bad thing. Like you say, like I think some of the notes of hope I felt were when people who I would expect to normally just say like, he was a thug, he was a criminal, this is how it goes, he sort of like, he earned his death on camera. They said like, no, this is a bad thing. When I saw that, like, performative as it is, that black square on Instagram all over, I was like, oh, we as a society still have a sense of right and wrong, and we so want to be right. We so want to be right. That's a fire that burns in every American and American adjacent person out there. Like, we want to be on the right side of history while we're making history. So I feel like that is what is going to save us in the end. Like, even the Juneteenth moment we're in right now.
Mm-hmm.
People are already pretending like, oh, we've been celebrating Juneteenth for the past 35 years. Like, it's just a way of not the full picture, but like, we want to be on the right side of history. And I do think that's enough to make the world a little better each time.
Mm. I agree. And it's like, I don't know about you, but I was getting messages from white folks, friends of mine, people I hadn't heard from in years, last May, last June, after this all went down, like expressing like their contrition, like I had no idea how bad it was. So I was hearing from people, literally, I couldn't say I hadn't even talked to this person in a good decade. And in fact, the people were coming out of the woodwork to explain how it made them felt. I was like, okay, well, at least that's progress. At least, you know, not that they're going to go share, oh, look, I talked to my Black friend about race and I'll share with everybody. But in this candid sort of quiet moment, they reached out and were like, no, this is really, really bad. I apologize that I didn't understand more. And for me, I took that as a win. It sucks that it took a man being murdered in cold blood for nearly 10 minutes for you to feel how damaging it can be to be a Black man in America. But I'm glad that you picked up the message. I'm glad that you.
I also got the unfun version of that from only like one person in my life, actually, who sort of like slid into my DM, someone I used to like casually know. Was like, don't you think you're too far with the statues? How does that feel? How does that fix racism? I'm like, no. I'm not, I may quote Gilmore Girls, but I'm not the Black person you're going to turn to sort of like excuse those racist thoughts you have. Like, no, go read the books, go find another one. But yeah, I do have hope. I do, lame as it is. I think sometimes I'm like, the older I get, I just make it a test, a binary. Am I a pessimist or am I an optimist about race? Mm-hmm. It's all the rage. Even if with all the exhaustion of living in our times, I am an optimist. I do think things are getting better and they will continue to get better. Yeah. But I think we also have an urge in us to, the same way we want to like make history associating with the good, we want to forget the bad. And when something bad, when the true ugliness happens, this country likes to look away from it. Like there was a storming of the Capitol less than a year ago. And if we just let it, people are like, are you still talking about that? That was so long ago. Who cares about it? That was a break of democracy. This experience, like we're all going through, that was it breaking right there.
Oh, well, yeah, well, I think that there's a lot of Trump amnesia going on. I think a lot of people, and I certainly hope that it wears off before the midterms, but there's a lot of Trump amnesia all of a sudden going around. And like even his children are trying to distance themselves, like, oh, that never happened. You know, they're trying to get the stink off of themselves. Like, no, this was a profoundly disgusting moment in this American experiment.
It makes me a patriot for this country because it was really genuinely heartbreaking to watch. I'm like, this is so wrong. This is the opposite of everything. This flag that some people are so proud of that I really enjoy having in my home. This was the moment where it was just failing me to see this happen. And I think we, as people of color, we have to keep, you know, unfun as it is sometimes, we have to keep pushing for the world to remember, to like, hey, it's not just Juneteenth, like the little fun party or barbecue you have or the cookout. Like there's a history behind it.
There was rape, torture, and murder created this thing here. So if anything, for those of us who, you know, we are an extension of who, you know, were dropped off of both certain places, I think we're all part of that continuum. And so we honor them by living our best lives, by not playing proxy to supremacy, but at the same time, by recognizing that the world we inhabit now is not too different from the world that they inhabited, but hopefully moving forward. And that's where the hope comes in again. Our children, our grandchildren, their grandchildren are going to live in a world that is smaller now than it ever has been. And that's a whole other discussion about how social media has sort of like,
yeah, we didn't get into it. These little things on our hands, these super computers that connect us to the entirety of the world so that everyone's opinion is accessible.
Even the bad ones, I think we're going to do the Q&A now, potentially. I told you we were going to start solving all the world's problems, man. Couldn't help it.
Another hour.
Hey guys, thank you so much. We got a bunch of questions are in here now. For everybody out there, if you got a question for Cyrus and Ben, definitely throw it in the Q&A box now. We're going to try to get to as many as possible. All right, first question from Dana Onstead. What books are you currently reading that you'd recommend, or what are some of your favorite books?
For both of us?
Mhm.
Oh, I just poured into Barack Obama's memoir because he, again, is a hero to me. So I was waiting, like I got that as a gift, and I've just been waiting on my shelf to crack into. So I'm a fiction guy, a nonfiction guy rather. So I love biographies, his even his wives, but yeah. And I'm thinking about writing another book. So it's so funny, like every time I pick up a book, like it gives me an idea or something, and then I put it down. And also I've got a lot going on. But yeah, Barack Obama is definitely, I would recommend. A Promised Land is really, really good read.
Damn, I haven't read it yet. Becoming was amazing. So I was just like, right now I'm in a phase where I'm rereading a lot of the Agatha Christie's because I'm trying to like, after this, I'm going back into YA and I'm trying to write a murder mystery. So I'm rereading my favorite sort of like Murder on the Nile, ABC murders. I think one I always recommend is Five Little Pigs. It's a great sort of like detective story. So I'm rereading those like light, easy stories that are just about one murder. That's fun.
That's awesome. From an anonymous attendee, how can people be helpful to you in getting your voices more widely heard and in igniting the voice of other Black and brown men?
I'll start for this one. It's not that, just elevate the voices you like, truly. That's something that is very, very simple. That's a bar that is very low to set. I think sometimes there's an expectation that you have to live up to. You don't just have to hold up one book. You don't just have to read one book. You have to stack up 7 books, starting with like White Fragility and how to be an
anti-racist. Yeah, like a whole curriculum.
As like a statue of you being a good person. No, you like Black music. Learn more about that artist, share it. You like Black businesses, shop there. It is very much in the simple daily integration of those voices in your life that I think you end up making the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm. And I also each one teach one is a overframe in our family. So like if you can share something with somebody, don't hesitate to share them. If something resonated with you or something even changed your life, the best thing you can do, the best friend an artist can have is an advocate. So if you read Ben's book, which I'm sharing with so many people because it really touched me, and I thought it was just a gem. Or other people's books, like the best thing you could be, the best advocate you could be, that will help me, other Black authors, to spread our word. And we also live in a time of social media, so retweet it, put an Instagram post up,
From Jennifer Cox, this is for Cyrus. When did the idea for the book come, and how did you collate all the tweets?
Okay, the second part, collating all the tweets, was actually very, very difficult because they have this thing now. My friend told me that you can get your Twitter archive. Ooh. So I went down a rabbit hole of things that I said, a lot of things I probably shouldn't have said, going back to 2013. And I was sifting through this stuff. Initially, I got it because I was going to structure the chapters around the tweets. But I think really early on in the writing, I just kind of kept writing. And I'm like, I'll let the tweets fit in somehow if they can fit in after I'm done writing. I just basically started writing and forgot all about my objective. And then when I went back, I was able to find things that kind of worked and provided little pockets of levity in a lot of the dense prose. So yeah, I actually worked backward more than forward, unfortunately. But it all ended up, I think, working out, in the way I wanted it.
I have a quick question for you, Cyrus. Do you feel like your social media is a work of writing, or is it a reflection of who you are? Does that make sense?
I definitely think it's both. I think that I probably got the hubris that I could write a full-length nonfiction book because I was writing so many different tweets and I was spending time on them. No, it's my wife's chagrin, like, you're still working on that tweet? I felt like, at first I talk about how comedians use it as a sort of text of jocular dexterity. If you could craft a great joke in 140 characters, it became a bit of an exercise that I work on every day. So at one point I abandoned the laughs and I abandoned this, trying to, make people laugh. And I said, okay, I can make a salient point here. I don't want to lose what I'm trying to say, searching for a punchline. So I started using it, and I think my writing definitely developed from just writing, punching out like 20, 30 tweets a day. How could it not? But yeah, I think it's definitely a reflection of me, but it's also a good writing exercise as well. And I feel like a lot of them actually stand on their own. So that's how they ended up working themselves into the book. I was able to say in 3 or 4 sentences what it was taking me half a chapter to elaborate on.
No, I love that answer, because I think like social media, especially Twitter, gets like poo-pooed a lot, but I'm off it these days. But I do think it's like such a flex. It's such an exercise of your mind to be able to, especially when it was like 120 or 140 characters. You have to get the entire thought out. You have to get the setup and the punchline in there. You have to be like in conversation with the world as it's happening. Mm-hmm. So I remember like the time that I was talking at a school and like the teachers were really mad at me was when like I advocated for social media as a creative tool, because I do think it trains us to create for an audience.
Yeah.
I was just curious about that.
Yeah, and I feel that it was a timestamp of this crazy time that we were living in. And I felt like, each one of them sort of like, provided a snapshot into the world that we were in at that point in time. So the craziness of, drinking the hydroxychloroquine, or him staring at the eclipse, like all these like absurd moments, I was able to comment on them in real time. And this is now part of the historical record, as far as I'm concerned. It happened. It's timestamped. Jack Dorsey has confirmed it.
That's hilarious. This is more of a comment than a question, but Candelaria Silva Collins says, your mom says don't keep secrets. She can handle the truth or the perception.
That's my mother. She's on there. Okay. Good to know. Well, I honestly, like, I started, like, again, you talk about a writer's hubris, Ben. The thunder started coming into my head about writing a novel, and it's just like, it's beating me up, and I'm like, I'm putting it off. Just like this book, I put off writing this book for like a good year and a half before I actually committed to start writing it. And now I've got this idea about writing a novel in my head, but it's going to cover a lot of pain, a lot of stuff that, I've not unearthed. So eventually the muses beat you up enough, and you're like, all right, I'll start typing. So I'm just waiting them out.
I'm very good at writing like the first third or the first half of a novel. The second half, it just takes like, honestly, what happens is very callous to say, but like I write the first half and then I try to sell it as a half book. So there's a publisher out there that's holding like half my check. Otherwise, it would just, my laptop would just be filled with like half novels. Read your novel, dude.
You got no more questions from the audience at the moment, but I got a question for you, Ben, if it's okay. Do you have any good like YA fiction recommendations for customers who come in and ask?
Ooh. Yes, I would say anything by E.B. Boy. Sometimes it feels weird to like just, I don't know, recommend people who are just like thriving all over the goddamn place. It's really, really good. Everybody talks about Punching the Air, which is her latest one, which is like amazing, but it's also very harrowing, and it's just sort of like about like the incarceration system and like Black lives in the country, all the unfun stuff we've been talking about. But I think like her second book, I think it was her second, Pride, is just like a Black Latinx retelling of Pride and Prejudice. And it's really, really fun. It's set in New York City. She's great at writing New York City. So sometimes you just want to read something light. Sometimes you just want to read something that's going to be like, I hope the two pretty kids like end up together at the end. And that one is one I always recommend to people.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you. So we got about 5 minutes left. Is there anything you guys want to like leave us with?
No, it's so funny when you said about like, reading something light, like coming out of the pandemic, coming out of, quarantine and everything. After writing this book, like I needed to decompress so bad. Like, what did you do to decompress? Like, I'm sure you binged everything that you could possibly binge in the past like year. I found myself going, honestly, I didn't think it would happen, but I went down a Bravo wormhole, and I just needed nothing. I needed nothingness. I needed not to think. I just needed to stare blankly at a television and laugh at trite stuff. And so I found myself, it was a release. I needed to, I put so much out. I just needed to just,
Okay, next time you need to say this 20 minutes in, because now we can talk about Bravo. I did the exact same thing this pandemic. I used to be like, oh, these are just like vapid, scary looking women with a lot of like, faces, getting drunk. No, I binged so many of those shows. I think that's like the perfect.
It's weird, isn't it so weird? Like, why would, I don't know. I felt compelled. I just didn't turn the channel. And I just stayed not turning the channel. I was watching Below Deck. Below Deck became like my TV crack. Like if you've not gone down the Below Deck wormhole, go down the Below Deck wormhole.
I don't like books. I've tried. Like, give me a Vanderpump Rules, give me a Real Housewives of wherever the hell, I'm okay. I just like a boat. It's very weird for me. I'm like, why are you on a boat right now? So long, and I'm okay with it. But no, it's like the perfect web. Just like, yeah, I'm gonna turn on the TV, absorb stuff, not feel anything. It's great.
Oh yeah. Sometimes it takes seeing somebody's drama to appreciate how drama-free your life is.
Oh, there's a little show called The Real Housewives of Potomac, and there's nothing about that title that should appeal to any of us after a discussion about Black life. But damn, it sucked me in. I think I watched like 4 seasons in 3 days. And then my mom was on the call with me. She was like, why are your eyes so red shot? And I was like, Potomac, man, Giselle's out of control. It's just like, anyway, it helped me.
Someone actually wants to know if you knew each other before this conversation.
Sorry?
Someone's asking if you knew each other before this conversation.
No, we're just fast friends, man.
No.
We probably sat at the same table at a wedding, didn't realize it, but
We have white friends in common.
yeah.
I bet we know people in common. No, we didn't know each other before.
But it's great. We both live in New York City, so I definitely plan on keeping in contact. But I think Ben might be my new uptown friend.
Yeah, come to Harlem. It's gentrifying, degentrifying. I don't know what's happening, but still expensive as heck. So
For sure.
That's awesome. Well, I thank you both so much for being with us tonight. That was really awesome. For everybody out there, if you still want to buy copies of these guys' books, you can go to the same page that you registered for this event, and you can pick up a copy there. You can go to brooklinebooksmith.com, go use our online shop, or you can just come on into the store. We have both of their books featured prominently. So yeah, definitely come on by. Sorry.
the one thing I say, because apparently booksellers aren't allowed to say it themselves, is like, don't buy your books on that A website with the arrow. Just don't do it. You can get your toilet paper there. You can get like your dishes there, whatever. But books, that thing we all love, go into a bookstore. You're watching like a feed from a bookstore right now. Go in there and buy all your books there.
I concur. Amen. Amen.
I appreciate you both. Thank you for that. Well, everybody, thank you so much for being here, Cyrus and Ben. Thank you so much.
Dude, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, brother. Take care.
You too.